Thank you. Thanks for having me. I love this topic. So we're here to talk about surrogate decision makers. And that is really a very broad category, right? So we're going to get into more of the specifics here in a second, but I wanted to define terms just to start us off. So a surrogate decision maker is anyone, whether it's a guardian or a durable power or the legal next of kin, that is working with medical teams to make medical decisions for a patient who can no longer do that for themselves. And maybe they can't do that because of a long-standing illness that has now progressed to the point where they're too demented or too confused. And it could be that they were suddenly in a car accident and now they need someone to decide for them while they're in a coma. So can be sudden, can be long-term. So who are surrogate decision makers? So the highest category of surrogate decision maker is the guardian of person. And I say guardian of person because once in my 20-year career, I have encountered someone who had a guardian just of their finances. So it's pretty rare. And guardians themselves, someone having a guardian is relatively rare. You definitely want to make sure that you ask for the paperwork for it, though, because some people will claim to be a guardian, and we really need to see the legal paperwork, no matter what medical system you're working in. And it's really the same for the durable power of attorney for healthcare. I want to say, too, that of the people that have a durable power of attorney, you'll ask this question, hey, do you have a durable power of attorney? And the person will say, oh, why, yes, I do, sometimes. And it's really important that you read the document, because I can't tell you, probably 90% of the durable power documents that we get and look through are actually for finances. And some of them do have a line that allows medical, but you'll go through pages and pages of, yes, you can open bank accounts and sell property and all these things. And then there might be a line, or there might not be, that says, and can make all medical decisions. So you really want to be careful and look at the document, consult your legal teams if you need to around that, because you want to make sure that you've got the right durable power of attorney documents that would allow you to work with this person for consent. Let's say the patient has neither. Something that I don't think I put very well in these slides is that in order to have a durable power of attorney, the person has to be competent enough to sign it, right? So the point at which the person can't do that, they're too confused, they're now in a coma, can't sign a durable power of attorney anymore. And so then it goes to the legal next of kin. And there's been some changes in that law that we'll get into. And this is another one of those. If you ask someone, if I said to Paulina, gosh, who's your legal next of kin? If she's a social worker, so she understands the question, but she might say, oh, no, it's my brother Joe. But that's just maybe who she wants. It's not necessarily your average folk walking around have no idea what the specific legal order is for legal next of kin. And so I wouldn't ask the question quite that way if you ask someone who their decision maker is. So just sticking with durable power of attorney for healthcare, if you're working with a client and you think that it would be to their advantage to sign a durable power, and I would say it's to everyone's advantage, even those of you who are listening to this presentation, you should all personally think of having a durable power of attorney for healthcare. So now is always a perfect time to sign one. You would want someone that would be able to act on that person's beliefs. So I might want absolutely everything done, every machine, every tube feeding, everything, but you might not. And that doesn't mean, just because you wouldn't go that far in terms of ventilators and tube feeding, that you can't be my consent authority, but you have to be comfortable abiding by my wishes. And I think sometimes people feel like they have to pick someone who is in alignment with their values, and they don't. They have to pick someone who's okay making their best judgment about what you would want. The person that's selected should not be receiving compensation, and I say that to mean professional staff. We all have people that we see clinically that don't have anyone in their life that can function in this role. And they might say to you, doctor, won't you agree to be my durable power of attorney? And hopefully you have internal policies that say whether you can or can't do that, and my hope is that they say that you cannot, because really, as care providers to this patient, we have an incentive. And it could be said that we have a conflict of interest actually in providing service in that role. The person should also pick someone who has the emotional capacity to make these decisions and can really handle, really tough stuff like, hey, is this a switch to comfort care at this point? What quality of life do you think that this person would want to live with? The person should be reliable, right? Someone who has no phone access for 6 months or is, just not generally someone who shows up isn't probably your best person to name as your durable power of attorney. And I should mention too that it's not a requirement that the person be notified that they have been named in this way. A lot of folks think, well, gosh, I'll just bring in my person and we'll get this paperwork done. The person, right or wrong, I can make the decision to sign the document right now and not let someone here know that they've in fact been named. But you can see how maybe that's not the best choice. Someone would really want to be familiar with my values and what I consider to be a reasonable quality of life. So really, the patient should have a heart-to-heart conversation with this person about really what the expectations are if faced with some of these decisions. And these are hard conversations to have. You can see why few people sign these, because this is tough stuff sometimes. If I name someone today and I don't need that someone for 20 years, maybe that person isn't alive. Maybe that person is no longer competent themselves to provide consent. So I always say it's great to name an alternate if you can. For some of our patients, we're lucky if they even have one person, so I get that. But in a perfect world, they would have an alternate. And like I mentioned before, really, we all should have these. Everyone should have these. Every patient that you see should have these, or at least you should be having the discussion with them about who their consent authority is and is it in alignment. And to make sure that you get copies of the document. If there is no guardian and there's no durable power, then decision-making falls to the legal next of kin. Every state has a different order for their legal next of kin, so what applies in Washington may not apply in other states. And in other states, if you look at their legal next of kin laws, it may be that the legal next of kin can only make a medical decision if it's life or death. So if I have someone who's comatose who needs their hand reconstructed while they're comatose, we can't get consent for that, right? In the state of Washington, that's not an issue, but it's just something to know. I think people that travel around may be more interested to know that even if you're relying on legal next of kin for medical decisions, that may not give the full authority that you would want. And something that I like to highlight too is that legal next of kin is just about consent for medical procedures. It has nothing to do with managing finances. And people often assume that perhaps their spouse, at the point at which they're not competent, can manage, the bank accounts and sell the house and do the things, and they can't. Under legal next of kin status, there's nothing with that actually. So, so in the state of Washington, this is what legal next of kin, this is the specific order that it has to go in. So the highest class, if you have someone in the highest class, so if you have a spouse or a registered domestic partner, then that is the legal next of kin. If that person declines to act, then it goes to the next in line, and so on and so forth. Something to know is that each category, everyone has to all agree. So if you're looking at number 2, which is all children of the patient who are at least 18 years of age, all of the children need to agree, no matter how many you have. Both parents need to agree, no matter if they divorced, ages ago and have been completely estranged. They have to agree. And if you have someone in that category, they can't designate someone else. So if I'm this person's spouse, but we've actually been estranged, but I really think that the person's girlfriend should be the consent authority. I can't give my power to someone else, right? I am the spouse, but I cannot give it to someone else. It falls naturally in the order in which it occurs. So I can choose to accept to act as legal next of kin or not. And if I step out of the mix, then it will automatically go to the children and then down the line. So let's look at this a little more closely. I know the font on these is really small. So the highlighted section is the new change to the law. And so you may be familiar with the top 4 there. And the changes are in part to help us, particularly working with folks that have reached a certain age where perhaps they have outlived many of the people in the first 4 categories. And if you haven't been able to sign a durable power of attorney, or there's no one to name, or the time has just passed when you're able to do that, then we now have some options that really allow you to go to look to other family members without having to pursue full guardianship. So we'll look at this first new addition, because these are pretty straightforward. Adult grandchildren, adult nieces and nephews, and adult aunts and uncles. It's not legally defined, the term familiar with. And my understanding is that is by design. And I know that there's sometimes discomfort around that, like how you can conceivably have nieces and nephews that never met the patient. And is it really ethical for them to consent for the patient? But if you think about it, in the 4 that we've been using for a very long time, you could definitely have had parents that never met the patient, even perhaps half siblings that never met the patient. I mean, there's other people that we've been consenting that haven't necessarily been completely familiar with the patient. So it's not legally defined. If you are, the standard that we use here at Harborview is if they've had any contact with the patient at any age, at any point in their life. Those of you in other health systems might have a different standard that you need to follow, but familiar with for us is really loosely defined for this reason. Now, the more complicated part of this law is number 8 here, at the physician's discretion. There's a number of things that we'll get into about this one, but I want to highlight a couple things. This has exhibited special care and concern. The standard documents that the declarant has to fill out have to indicate why they think they, how they know the patient. The personal values question they have to answer, like what they know about the person. And you'll see here that it is specifically excluded, that this is not someone who works in the capacity of the patient or is employed by someone who provides care to the patient or is receiving compensation in any way, and that they have to sign a declaration. So you can only use the declarant if you have no one else in the hierarchy. And I know we've all been tempted. If you've done consents like this, you're like, oh my goodness, I can hardly reach this daughter, right? She doesn't return my calls, and I have this girlfriend who's been with the patient for forever, who's willing to sign the declaration. Can't I just skip over the daughter and go for the girlfriend who's been living with this patient for 20 years? And the answer is no, we can't. If you have someone higher up in the hierarchy, you have to use them. And there's always the question of how far and wide do we search before we can use a declarant, because I think that there's a time when you're looking for Joe Smith in all the states, and there's just too many. You can't sort through them. And so whatever process you're using right now to find legal next of kin, you want to make sure that you fully engage that process as you would normally, even if you have someone who's waiting to see if they can act as a declarant. And something to note too, that the declaration that the person signs has to include all of the elements. And so if you're getting an outside declaration, you want to make sure that someone is reviewing that, whether it's someone in your legal office or someone is actually examining that document to make sure that all the lines are included on there. The law was very specific about that. So you notice the words physician discretion. Each physician can decide whether they'll accept a declaration. So if I sign a declaration saying that I'm going to consent for you, the orthopedist might accept that declaration, but the general surgeon does not. And they're both perfectly acceptable answers. They're both covered under this law. One might just feel that, yes, what I've written is appropriate, and the other might be like, nope, I just feel like you don't really know her. Sorry. If you have more than one person sign a declaration, and that can happen, you should really consult your legal team. I know here in the University of Washington medical system, there's a decision made about if they both agree, then we can accept both declarants, but if they disagree, if they're opposing, then we can accept neither. But your health system might have a different answer to that question, and it's hopefully it doesn't come up, but it certainly could. And I want to highlight, I know this is a geriatric echo, but to know that consent for minors is not impacted by this law. And I mention that just in case some of you are moonlighting in other areas, and perhaps you're thinking, gosh, this is great because we can actually go to aunts and uncles and different things for consent. I wanted to give you too just what the declaration looks like. There's a sample that the WSHA folks put out. You might have some of these in your system already, but you you know, someone brings in a declaration, one way, if you're like, I don't actually know if this meets the criteria for it, is to have them sign a declaration that's native to your health system. If you have one, would be a way to, you know, if it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you're trying to figure out what to do, you can have someone re-sign that. So that's a possibility, but I don't know if folks have questions. That's really what I had.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that presentation.